Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. The night had always been William Langdon's sanctuary. He, a billionaire businessman, would often retreat into the silence of the dark hours after a long day, seeking solace from the chaos of his fast-paced world. His luxurious black sports car, a symbol of his success, cruised down the empty streets of the city. The headlights illuminated the misty fog that enveloped the city, casting long shadows in the otherwise quiet streets. But on this particular night, the familiar calm would soon be shattered. William's mind was preoccupied with the new project he had been overseeing at his company, a massive deal that could propel his business to new heights. Yet his thoughts remained clouded, as though something deep within him knew that life, in all its unpredictability, was about to throw him a curveball he never saw coming. As he turned a corner, his grip on the steering wheel tightened. The sound of the tires squealing against the slick pavement cut through the silence. His vision blurred for a split second. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a slight distraction. But that was all it took. In the blink of an eye, the car jerked violently. To the side, a deafening crash followed by the sound of twisting metal as the sleek black car collided with the concrete wall. The force of the impact propelled William forward, his forehead striking the steering wheel with bone-shattering force. His body went limp, his hands losing grip of the wheel. The world around him spun into oblivion. In the aftermath of the collision, all was quiet. The only sound was the faint, labored breathing of a man who had been robbed of his consciousness. The car's engine sputtered before falling into an eerie silence, as if even the vehicle itself was holding its breath. Near the wreckage, huddled, beneath the cold night air, sat a woman, Grace. She was no stranger to the hardships of life. In fact, it had become her constant companion. Homeless and alone, she had learned to live without expectation, without hope of change. But tonight, things were different. The crash had shaken the ground beneath her feet, and an impulse she couldn't explain urged her to move. Grace, with her tired eyes and worn-out clothes, slowly stood up from where she had been resting in the shadows. She had no particular reason to be near this street, no business, no appointments. She simply wandered from place to place, surviving by the smallest of chances. But tonight, fate had something else in store for her. The car crash, loud and jarring, had broken her routine in an instant, and she found herself walking toward the wrecked vehicle, drawn by something deep within her. As she approached the scene, her heart raced. She saw the man, his body slumped in the car, his head resting against the wheel. His face was contorted in pain, blood dripping from his forehead. She couldn't just walk away. She couldn't let him lie there. Grace's hands trembled, unsure if she could help him. But her instinct screamed louder than her fear. She ran to the car, her mind racing. Was he dead? She needed to check. Without thinking, she grabbed the handle of the door. It was locked, but she tugged harder, panic rising. In her chest, finally it gave way, and she pulled open the door. The smell of burning rubber mixed with the scent of gasoline filled her nose. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to focus. She leaned into the car and reached for the man's seatbelt, her hands shaking as she fumbled to release it. It was a struggle. His body felt heavy, his limbs unresponsive. With a grunt of effort, Grace managed to undo the buckle, pulling him from the driver's seat. He was cold to the touch, his breathing shallow and ragged. She dragged him out of the car, her muscles burning with the effort. Each step felt like an eternity. The sound of her breath was the only thing she could focus on. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The man's life was slipping away from him with every passing second, and she was the only one who could help. "Come on. Stay with me," she whispered, though her voice was shaky and full of uncertainty. She didn't know him, but she couldn't. Let him die. She couldn't stand by and watch. The street was empty. No one else was around. The night seemed to have swallowed any chance of immediate help. Grace, covered in the man's blood, struggled to drag him farther from the wreckage, but her movements were clumsy. Her own body was weak from days without proper food or rest. She knew the streets better than anyone, but the feeling of isolation had never been this suffocating. The minutes dragged on like hours. But then, finally, a car passed by. Grace waved her arms frantically, her breath coming in sharp gasps as she shouted for help. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver, a middle-aged man who appeared shocked, got out and ran toward them. "Call an ambulance," Grace ordered. Her voice hoarse. Without hesitation, the man dialed 911, speaking in frantic tones. Grace stayed with the injured man, her hands still holding his, trying desperately to keep him conscious. His breathing was shallow, his face pale as death. There was a moment when she thought he might slip away for good, but somehow he held on. The minutes felt like hours. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. Grace, exhausted and covered in the stranger's blood, didn't dare let go of him. She couldn't. The ambulance arrived, and the paramedics rushed out, quickly taking over. "Who did this?" one of the medics asked. "A woman." "And she saved him," the driver answered, his voice still trembling from the shock of the accident. As the paramedics worked to stabilize William, Grace stepped back, her eyes wide and empty. She had no place here. She was just the woman who had found him, just the person who had pulled him from the wreck. And yet in that moment, she had become the one thing standing between life and death for a man she didn't know. The paramedics finished their work, and William was loaded into the ambulance. The doors slammed shut and the vehicle sped away, leaving only the sound of the city in the night. Grace stood still, staring after the vehicle, a sense of numbness creeping over her. She couldn't understand why she had done it. Why had she helped him? It wasn't like she was a hero. She was just a woman trying to survive. Yet something inside her told her that she had made the right choice. She couldn't explain it, but she didn't need to. She had acted. She had saved him. William Langdon woke up with a sharp, searing pain coursing through his head. His eyes fluttered open, but the blinding light that hit him made him squint in discomfort. For a few moments, the world around him was a blur. He could hear muffled voices in the distance, but his head throbbed with such intensity that it was almost impossible to focus. He tried to sit up, but the movement only intensified the pain. The sterile, clinical scent of a hospital filled his nostrils, and for a moment he wondered if he was still dreaming. Where was he? His vision began to clear, and he saw the white walls of a hospital room, the steady beep of machines around him. His right arm was bandaged, and he could feel an intravenous line in his left arm. The reality of the situation began to sink in. He was alive, but barely. The car crash was real. It hadn't been a nightmare. The memories of the accident flooded. Back driving down the street, the sudden loss of control, the screech of tires, the sickening thud as his head hit the wheel. And then nothing. Darkness. He groaned, trying to move but finding it impossible to escape the overwhelming exhaustion that clung to him. His body felt heavy, as though it had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. A nurse entered the room, her footsteps soft but alert. She was young, with kind eyes, and when she saw that William was awake, her expression softened. "Mr. Langdon, you're awake," she said, her voice soothing, yet full of concern. "How are you feeling?" William tried to speak, but his throat was dry, and his voice came out in a rasp. He cleared his throat, forcing the words out. "What happened? How did I end up here?" The nurse quickly checked his vitals and adjusted. "The IV drip. You were in a car accident, a severe one. You're lucky to be alive. The paramedic said your life was saved by someone who was at the scene." "Someone?" William repeated, his mind still clouded by the events. He couldn't remember much after the crash, but he vividly recalled the moment the car had skidded. And then nothing. Yes, the nurse continued. A woman. She pulled you out of the car and kept you alive until the paramedics arrived. She was the one who called for help. William furrowed his brow, trying to process the information. A woman had saved him, a stranger. He was alive because of her. But something about the way the nurse spoke made him feel like there was more to the story than he could remember. "Do you know where she is?" William asked, his voice a little steadier now. The nurse paused for a moment before answering, her face unreadable. "She left before the police arrived. She didn't want to be identified." William frowned. It didn't make sense. Why would someone save his life and then just leave without a word? And why would she refuse to be recognized? Something about the situation felt off. But before he could ask more questions, the door to his room opened and a man entered. He was tall, with sharp features and a serious expression, dressed in a dark suit that screamed wealth and power. It took William a moment to recognize him as his lawyer, Michael Richardson. "William, you're awake. Thank God," Michael said, his voice filled with relief. "You've been through hell. We need to talk about what happened." William nodded slowly, his mind still racing. What happened? Who was the woman who saved me? Michael's face hardened slightly. "I've been trying to get more information. I spoke with the hospital staff, but they don't know much. All we know is that a homeless woman was there and she helped you. It's strange, though. No one seems to have any details about her." William's eyes narrowed. "Homeless? Why would a homeless woman risk her life for me?" Michael hesitated before responding. "I don't know, William. It's an odd situation. But what's more concerning is that she didn't want any recognition. It's like she vanished without a trace. I've already contacted the police to see if they can find out anything more, but so far there's been no sign of her." William sat up slightly, his mind racing. He felt a strange connection to this woman. His thoughts kept circling back to her, a nameless, faceless person who had saved him. Who was she? Why had she done it? And why hadn't she stayed to receive any thanks or even a reward? "I need to find her," William said, his voice firm. Michael raised an eyebrow, surprised by the intensity in William's voice. "Are you sure that's a good idea? She seems to want to stay out of the spotlight. You may not even be able to track her down." William didn't care. There was something pulling at him, a feeling deep in his gut that he couldn't explain. He had to find her. He needed to know who she was and why she had done what she did. Days passed, and William's recovery was slow but steady. The doctors were impressed with his resilience, but the pain was constant. Every time he tried to sit up for too long, his body screamed in protest. He had multiple fractures, and his head injuries were more severe than anyone had expected. But despite the pain, he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to find the woman who had saved him. He couldn't stop thinking about her. There were moments when he would lie in his hospital bed, his mind wandering, replaying the crash in his head. In his darkest moments, he couldn't escape the overwhelming sense of gratitude for the woman who had pulled him from the wreckage. He didn't even know her name, but he felt an inexplicable bond. Eventually, after several days, William was discharged from the hospital. His lawyer, Michael, had arranged for him to return to his private estate, but William wasn't interested in resting. He had made up his mind. He would search for the woman. Grace sat in her usual spot on the street corner, the chill of the evening. Air biting at her skin, her worn-out shoes, barely holding together, scraped against the pavement as she shifted her weight. She'd been here for hours, her stomach growling with hunger, but she didn't have the energy to move. The world had always felt indifferent to her, and tonight it felt no different. The car crash she had witnessed days earlier was still fresh in her mind. She had been the one to save him, yet she hadn't stayed for any recognition. That wasn't why she had done it. She hadn't wanted to be a hero. She had simply done what anyone in her position would have done. And yet, now that the moment had passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed inside her. As she sat in the cold, the sound of footsteps approaching caught her attention. Grace looked up, expecting to see a passerby or another beggar, but her heart skipped a beat when she saw a familiar figure, William Langdon. He stood in front of her, looking as out of place as anyone could in the rundown part of town. His designer suit, though slightly disheveled, still held the unmistakable sign of wealth, but his eyes, those eyes, told a different story. They were searching, looking for something, or someone. "Grace," William said, his voice softer than she expected. She froze. How did he know her name? She had never told him her name. She hadn't even spoken to him since the night of the crash. "I've been looking for you," he continued, his tone earnest. "I need to thank you for saving my life." Grace stood up quickly, her mind racing. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice shaky. "I don't want anything from you. I didn't save you for thanks." William took a step closer, his expression filled with genuine gratitude. "I don't care about thanks. I need to know why you did it. Why did you save me?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The world seemed to pause around them as Grace searched for words. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Because you needed saving." William stood motionless in front of Grace, the weight of her words settling around him like a thick fog. "Because you needed saving." The simplicity of her statement was both maddening and profound. What did she mean by that? Was it just a random act of kindness, or was there something deeper, something he couldn't yet understand? Grace's eyes avoided his, and for a moment she seemed to shrink into herself, as though the very question he'd asked had startled her. She shifted uncomfortably from one foot to the other, her worn shoes scraping against the cold pavement. The flickering street lamp above them cast long shadows, adding an air of mystery to the already surreal moment. "Why do you care?" Grace's voice was sharp, as though she was trying to protect herself from something. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about me." William took a cautious step forward, drawn not only by the need for answers, but by something else, something that stirred within him whenever he looked at her. "I don't know you," he said quietly, "but I can't stop thinking about you. You saved my life, and now I need to understand why." Grace shook her head, her gaze darting around, avoiding his. "I didn't save you because I wanted anything," she said, almost as if she were trying to convince herself. "I didn't expect any of this. But you did save me," William pressed, "and I can't just walk away from that. I owe you everything." There was a long silence, and William could feel the weight of her hesitation pressing down on both of them. She seemed so out of place in this part of town, in those tattered clothes that barely protected her from the biting cold. Yet there was something about her that made him believe she was more than just a homeless woman. There was something in her eyes, a strength, an untold story, that intrigued him more than he was willing to admit. "I didn't do it for you," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I did it for me." "For you?" William repeated, confusion lacing his tone. "I don't understand." Grace took a deep breath, and for the first time since he had approached her, she met his gaze. Her eyes were fierce, yet there was a vulnerability there that sent a chill through him. "I've lived a long time without asking for anything, without trusting anyone, but that night I felt something. Maybe it was the desperation, or maybe it was just the fact that I saw you, and you were about to die, and I thought, maybe this is the only chance I'll get to do something good." William was struck by the rawness of her words. Here was a woman who had been through things he couldn't even begin to imagine. A woman who had given up on the world, on people, yet still, she had reached out to save him. "You didn't just save me that night," William said softly, his voice tinged with awe. "You gave me something I never even knew I needed. A second chance. Grace's expression hardened, and she took a step back, as though she was pulling away from something she couldn't allow herself to feel. "You're wrong," she said, shaking her head. "I didn't give you anything. You're here because you were lucky, and because I happened to be in the right place at the right time." William's heart pounded in his chest. This woman, who had every reason to shut herself off from the world, had given him a gift he couldn't repay. And yet she seemed determined to push him away, to act as though nothing had happened. The injustice of it stung him deeply. He couldn't let her go like this. "Not again. I'm not leaving," he said firmly, taking another step toward her. "I don't care if you want me to. I don't care if you push me away. I need to know more about you. I need to understand why you did what you did, because something tells me there's more to you than meets the eye." Grace's eyes flickered, with something between anger and disbelief. "You don't get it, do you? You think you can just waltz into my life and fix everything? Well, you can't." She turned away from him, the hard edge in her voice betraying the emotions she was trying so hard to hide. "You're a rich businessman. You've never known what it's like to not have a place to sleep or food to eat. You've never had to fight just to survive. And now you want to know about me, want to know why I saved you." William's throat tightened. She was right, of course. He had never experienced the kind of struggle she had. He had been born into wealth, with every opportunity laid out before him. He had never had to fight for survival. But that didn't mean he didn't understand loss. That didn't mean he hadn't suffered in his own way. "I don't want to fix anything," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I just want to understand you. I want to know who you are, Grace. I want to help you, if you'll let me." For a moment, Grace stood there, unmoving, as though the weight of his words had taken her by surprise. Her face softened just for a moment, and William saw a flicker of something he couldn't name. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. "You want to help me?" she repeated bitterly, turning back to face him. "I don't need your help, William. I didn't save you because I wanted something from you. I saved you because for once I thought maybe, just maybe, I could do something that mattered." William was silent for a moment, the harshness of her words sinking in. He had always been a man who thrived on control, on getting what he wanted. But here, with Grace, he felt powerless. For the first time in his life, he felt as though he had no control over the situation, and it terrified him. He had thought that once he found her, once he understood the woman who had saved him, everything would make sense. But now, all he had were more questions. The deeper he tried to go, the more elusive the answers became. "Okay," he said quietly, his voice low. "I won't push you, but I can't just walk away either. You saved my life, Grace. That means something to me, and I need to know why. I need to understand." Grace closed her eyes for a brief moment, her face softening just slightly. It was as if she was fighting an internal battle, one that she wasn't sure she was ready to lose. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke again, her voice quieter, more hesitant. "It's not about you, William," she said softly. "It's about me. I've lived my whole life believing that the world doesn't owe me anything. And that night I saw you, and for once I didn't want to believe that. For once I wanted to believe that something good could happen, that I could do something good." William felt a lump form in his throat as he listened to her. The pain in her voice was palpable. He didn't know how to respond, but he knew one thing for sure. There was more to this woman than he had ever imagined. She wasn't just the homeless woman who had saved his life. She was someone who had been through hell and back, someone who had learned to survive without hope, without anyone to lean on. And in that moment, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he could offer her something more than gratitude. "I'm not going anywhere," he said again, this time with more conviction. "I don't care if you want me to. I'm not going to walk away. From you, Grace." Grace looked up at him, her expression unreadable. For a brief moment their eyes locked, and something passed between them, something unspoken. The air seemed thick with unfulfilled longing, with the tension of two people from entirely different worlds, yet somehow drawn to each other in ways they couldn't explain. "I don't need saving, William," she said softly, almost to herself. "But maybe I need something else." William didn't know what she meant, but the answer was in the way she looked at him, a glimmer of hope, fragile and uncertain. The days that followed were a blur of confusion for both William and Grace. Their paths had crossed in the most unlikely of ways, and now neither of them seemed able to break free from the strange, invisible tether that had bound them together. William had been determined to learn more about the woman who had saved his life, but Grace remained as elusive and distant as ever. Though their interactions were few, every conversation left him with more questions than answers. William had insisted on keeping in touch, reaching out to her every few days, but Grace was reluctant. She hadn't expected the rich businessman to keep pursuing her. She had never wanted anything from him, and the idea of owing anyone, especially someone like him, was something she could never bring herself to accept. Yet, despite her best efforts to push him away, she found herself unable to ignore the strange connection that had formed between them. It wasn't just about saving his life. There was something deeper, something that neither of them fully understood. One crisp morning, just days after their last meeting, William received a call from Grace. Her voice, typically guarded and cold, was now tinged with something else, something that he couldn't place. "William," she said, her words hurried, "I need to see you." His heart skipped a beat. "Grace, are you all right?" he asked, suddenly concerned. "What happened?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a deep sigh. "It's not what you think. I just need to talk to you. It's about everything." William's mind raced. He hadn't expected to hear from her again so soon, and the urgency in her voice only made him more anxious. "Where are you?" "I'll come to you right now." "I'll meet you at the park near the river," Grace replied. And before he could respond, she hung up. William didn't waste a second. He grabbed his coat, left his office, and made his way to the park where they had agreed to meet. The cool wind rustled the leaves of the trees, and the sound of the river flowing nearby added to the peaceful ambiance. But the peace was fleeting, as a sense of anticipation built within him. He arrived at the park within minutes, his breath visible in the cold air as he scanned the area. It didn't take long for him to spot Grace. She was sitting on a bench by the river, her head lowered, as if deep in thought. Her posture was tense, her arms crossed tightly against her chest as she stared into the distance. It was as though the world around her no longer mattered, as though she had withdrawn into herself completely. William approached slowly, unsure of what to expect. When Grace noticed him, she looked up, her eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before. "Fear." "Grace," he said softly, sitting down beside her. "What's going on? You sounded scared on the phone." She gave him a fleeting glance before looking away again. "I'm not scared," she muttered, but there was a tremor in her voice that betrayed her words. "I just don't know what I'm doing anymore." William remained silent, allowing her space to speak. He could tell that something was weighing heavily on her. Grace was not the kind of person to ask for help. She had spent years living in the shadows, surviving by her own wits and instincts. But now she was in a situation that was beyond her control. "I've been trying to keep my distance," Grace continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Trying to live my life the way I always have. But it's not working anymore." William turned his body toward her, his gaze intense. "Grace, you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to keep pushing me away. Whatever it is, we can face it together." She shook her head, the motion sharp. "You don't understand. You're not the one who's been living on the streets. You're not the one who has to look over your shoulder every day, wondering who's watching, who's listening." William's heart tightened. "Then help me understand," he urged, gently. "Tell me what's going on, please." For a moment, Grace remained silent, her eyes scanning the river as though searching for something in the rushing water. She was torn between wanting to tell him everything and holding on to the walls she had so carefully built around herself. For years, finally she spoke again, her voice low and raw. I have a past," she confessed, her words hanging in the air between them. "A past that I can't escape, no matter how hard I try." William's chest tightened. "What kind of past?" Grace hesitated, her eyes narrowing as she struggled to find the right words. "A dangerous one," she said, almost too quietly. "To hear, a past that follows me wherever I go, a past I can never outrun." William leaned forward, his eyes filled with concern. "What happened, Grace? You can trust me." She turned to face him, her eyes filled with a storm of emotions. "I was involved in something that went wrong. People died, William. People who were close to me." The weight of her words hit him like a physical blow. William didn't know what to say. He couldn't imagine the kind of life she had led, the kind of trauma she had endured. Yet despite the darkness of her past, he couldn't help but feel that she was stronger than she gave herself credit for. "I didn't kill anyone," Grace continued, her voice trembling. "But I was there when it happened. I saw things I shouldn't have, and now those people are after me. They'll do anything to make sure I don't talk." William was stunned. He had never expected anything like this. Grace, the woman who had saved his life, was running from something far darker than he had imagined. She was in danger, and it seemed like there was no place for her to hide. "Who are they?" William asked, his voice firm with resolve. Grace's face hardened, her eyes flashing with fear and determination. "I don't know their names, but I know they won't stop. They won't rest until they find me. And when they do, I don't know what will happen." William's mind raced. There was no way he could let Grace face this alone. She had saved him, and now it was his turn to protect her. He couldn't promise her that everything would be all right, but he could promise one thing. He wouldn't let her face this danger by herself. "Grace," he said softly, placing a hand gently on hers. "I don't know everything about your past, but I know this. I won't let them hurt you. Not while I'm around." For a long moment, Grace didn't respond. She just stared at him, as if weighing his words, trying to decide if she could trust him. She had lived a life of distrust, never allowing anyone close enough to hurt her. But something in William's voice, in his unwavering resolve, made her believe him. For the first time in a long time, she felt the smallest glimmer of hope. "I can't ask you to protect me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but maybe I'll let you try." William smiled softly, his eyes filled with determination. "You don't have to ask, Grace. I'm not going anywhere." The weight of Grace's past hung over them like a storm cloud, a dark shadow that neither of them could escape. William had known from the beginning that helping her wouldn't be easy, but nothing had prepared him for the depth of the danger she was in. The people she had crossed, the ones who were now hunting her, were far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Grace's past was no longer just her problem. It was now his as well, and as the days passed, William found himself drawn deeper into the world she had tried so hard to escape. He had vowed to protect her, but he knew that keeping her safe would be an uphill battle. After their meeting in the park, William had insisted that Grace stay with him. She had resisted, of course. Her pride, her fear of putting him in danger, made her hesitant to accept his help, but in the end, she had relented. She had no other choice. Grace was right to be cautious. He was a billionaire, and his wealth made him an obvious target for the kind of people she was running from. Yet, despite the danger, William felt a sense of responsibility. He had been saved by Grace once, and now it was his turn to return the favor. They had moved into his private estate on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling mansion that was both a refuge and a fortress. It was the perfect place to hide, or so they thought. But as the days wore on, William began to notice that the tension in Grace's eyes never eased. She was always looking over her shoulder, always aware of her surroundings, and every knock on the door sent her into a state of nervous alertness. William could see it in her, her desperation to escape the ghosts of her past, to leave behind the life that had nearly destroyed her. But it wasn't that easy. The people she had crossed had already found out about her, and they weren't about to let her disappear without a fight. One night, as William sat in his office reviewing business matters, he heard the soft click of a door opening. He looked up to see Grace standing in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Grace?" he called out, concerned. What's wrong?" She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her with a soft click. She looked at him, her expression unreadable, before walking over to where he sat. There was something in her eyes, something he hadn't seen before. It was the look of someone who was about to make a decision that would change everything. "I have to go," she said, her voice tight with emotion. William's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean you have to go?" "Grace, we're safer here. You're not running anywhere." She shook her head, her hands trembling. "You don't understand, William. They're already here. I've seen them. I've heard them. I'm not safe here. Not anymore." He stood up quickly, moving toward her. "What are you talking about? Who's here?" "People from my past," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They've found me." The words hit William like a punch to the gut. He had feared this moment, but hearing it from her lips made the reality of the situation hit him with full force. He had tried to protect her, to shield her from the dangers that lurked in the shadows, but it seemed that the past had finally caught up with them. "We have to leave," Grace said urgently. "Now." William's mind raced as he tried to process what she was saying. "We can't just leave," he replied, trying to stay calm. "We can't run forever, Grace. We need a plan." "There's no time for a plan," Grace snapped, her eyes wide with panic. "They'll come for me, and if they find us here, they'll hurt you. I can't let that happen." He reached for her, grabbing her shoulders to steady her. "I'm not going anywhere without you. You're not alone in this, Grace. I promised I would protect you, and I will." For a moment, they stood there, locked in a silent stare. Grace's expression softened slightly, but there was still a fear in her eyes that couldn't be erased. She wanted to believe him, but the scars of her past ran too deep. Trusting anyone, especially someone like him, was something she had never allowed herself to do. "I don't want to put you in danger," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're not," William said firmly, "but I can't let you run away again. Not now." There was a long pause as Grace seemed to wrestle with her emotions, torn between wanting to protect him and needing to protect herself. Finally, she sighed, a deep, exhausted sound that seemed to carry all the weight of her past with it. "All right," she said quietly, "but we need to leave now. We don't have much time." William nodded, his mind already working through the logistics. "I'll get the car ready. We're going to get you to safety, Grace. I promise." As he walked past her toward the door, Grace called out to him, "William, don't get involved in this. You don't know what they're capable of. These people don't stop until they get what they want." He paused, turning back to look at her. There was a look of pain in her eyes, as if she were begging him to understand. But he couldn't. He had made a promise to her, and he wasn't about to break it. "I'm already involved, Grace," he said softly. "There's no turning back." The night was tense as William and Grace made their way out of the mansion. The air was thick with anticipation, the fear of what might happen next hanging over them like a dark cloud. William had taken precautions, arranging for an escape route that led to one of his more remote properties, a safe house that he had kept hidden for years. But as they approached the car, William's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his eyes scanning the screen. It was an encrypted message from Michael, his lawyer. William had trusted Michael with everything, from his business dealings to his personal life. But the message he read now made his blood run cold. "William, I'm sorry. They've already been here. They know about Grace. They know where you are." William's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to Grace, who was already looking at him with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They're here," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "They know where we are. They're coming." Grace's face went pale, her body stiffening in shock. No, this can't be happening. How did they find us?" "I don't know," William muttered, his mind racing. "But we have to move. Now." Without another word, they climbed into the car, and William floored the accelerator. As the mansion disappeared behind them, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. They had no idea who was after them or how far the reach of Grace's past extended, but one thing was certain: the danger was closing in. The drive seemed endless, the roads winding and dark, but it wasn't until they reached the outskirts of the city that William felt a brief moment of relief. The safe house was just ahead, hidden in plain sight, a place where they could lay low for a while, gather their bearings, and plan their next move. But as they turned onto the gravel road that led to the property, William noticed something strange. A dark SUV parked at the entrance, its engine idling. His heart skipped a beat. "They've found us," Grace whispered, her voice barely audible. William slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt just a few feet away from the SUV. His mind raced, and for a split second everything seemed to slow down. The danger was real. It was no longer just a vague threat from the past. It was here, right in front of him. "Get out of the car," he ordered Grace, his voice steady but filled with urgency. They both stepped out of the car, Grace's hand clutching his as they moved toward the safe house. William's mind was sharp, but the fear in Grace's eyes told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just about survival. This was about something much bigger. And now they had nowhere to run. The tension in the air was suffocating. William and Grace stood frozen, eyes locked on the dark SUV that sat in front of the entrance to the safe house. The engine hummed softly, a constant reminder that danger was closer than ever. Grace gripped William's hand tighter, her knuckles white from the force, her breath shallow and quick. William knew they were trapped. The only thing he could do now was buy them time. His mind raced, calculating their options. But the options were limited. They could try to make a run for it, but the SUV was blocking the only way out. And if they stayed here, they would be sitting ducks, easy targets for whoever was inside that vehicle. "Grace," William whispered urgently, his voice low but firm, "I need you to stay calm. I need you to trust me." Grace looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. She had been running from her past for so long that it seemed like there was no place left to hide. The fear she had buried deep inside her now rose to the surface, threatening to consume her. But when she looked at William, she saw something she hadn't seen in years, someone who was willing to fight for her, someone who was not backing. "Oh, down. I trust you," she whispered back, her voice shaky but resolute. Without wasting another moment, William reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He had a plan, but it was risky. There was no guarantee it would work, but it was their only shot. He quickly sent a text to Michael, his lawyer, using an encrypted channel. "Mike, we're at the safe house. SUV outside. Need backup. Now." William put the phone back in his pocket, keeping his gaze fixed on the SUV. Every second felt like an eternity. He could feel his heart pounding. In his chest, each beat reminding him of the stakes. He couldn't lose her, not now, not after everything they had been through. For a moment, nothing happened. The SUV sat there, still and silent, as if its occupants were waiting for something. William's mind spun, trying to think of what they could do next. He couldn't stay in the open for long. They had to move. "Stay behind me," William said, his voice steady. He didn't want Grace to see him panic. He wanted to be the protector, the person who would keep her safe no matter what. Grace nodded, her body tense, her steps hesitant but resolute as she followed him. William made his way toward the SUV, his movements calculated. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the moonlight reflected off the dust-covered windows of the vehicle. He couldn't make out the faces of the people inside, but he knew they were there, waiting. He didn't know what to expect when he reached the SUV. Was it a trap? Would they open fire as soon as he approached? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but he kept moving. He had made it this far, and he couldn't stop now. When he reached the vehicle, he hesitated, unsure of what to do. The door of the SUV swung open, suddenly, and a man stepped out, tall and imposing. He wore a dark suit, his face obscured by the shadows. His posture was casual, as though he wasn't worried about the situation at all. But William knew better. This man wasn't here for small talk. "You've been a hard man to find, Langdon," the man said, his voice low and smooth. "I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you'd be smarter than this." William didn't flinch. He had dealt with powerful, dangerous people before, but something about the way this man spoke made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. This was no ordinary criminal. This man was dangerous, and he had no intention of letting them leave. "What do you want?" William asked, keeping his voice steady. The man smirked, his eyes narrowing with a hint of amusement. "What do I want? That's a good question. I want a lot of things, but for now I'll settle for you handing over Grace. She's the one I'm really after." Grace's breath caught in her throat. The moment she had feared had finally arrived. The man was talking about her, the very person who had saved William's life, who had risked everything to protect him. She had always known that her past would catch up with her, but now it was real. Now it was in front of her, threatening to destroy everything she had tried to rebuild. "You don't have to do this," William said, his voice cold, his stance firm. "Grace isn't your problem anymore. Let her go." The man chuckled darkly. "You think you can just walk away from this, Langdon? That's cute. But this isn't about what you want. This is about what I want. And if you don't give her to me, I'll make sure you both regret it." William's hand instinctively reached for the gun he had kept hidden under his jacket. He wasn't a violent man, but he wasn't about to let this man take Grace away. He couldn't, he wouldn't. She had already been through too much. Before William could make a move, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Freeze!" The man in front of them stiffened, his eyes darting toward the voice. A second figure emerged from the shadows. Michael, his lawyer, the man who had been working behind the scenes to protect William and Grace. He was flanked by two others, each armed and ready for action. "Back off, Carl," Michael said, his voice icy and authoritative. "You're not getting anything from them. This ends here." Carl, the man from the SUV, hesitated for a moment, sizing up the situation. He didn't like it, but he also knew when he was outmatched. He glared at William, then at Grace, his eyes burning with fury. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Langdon. I'm not done with you yet." Without another word, Carl turned and jumped back into the SUV. The engine roared to life as the vehicle sped off into the night, disappearing into the distance. William exhaled slowly, his body finally releasing the tension he had been holding. Onto for what felt like an eternity. Grace was safe, at least for now. Michael approached, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes scanning Grace and William. "We're fine," William replied, his voice still steady but laced with exhaustion. "Thanks for the backup, Mike." Michael nodded. "No problem, it's what I'm here for. You're not in this alone." Grace stood silently, her eyes distant, as if the events of the night had left her in shock. The fight was over, for now, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. "I thought I was done running," she whispered, almost to herself. "I thought I could leave all of this behind." "You're not done," William said softly, walking over to her. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, offering the only comfort he could. "You're not alone anymore, Grace. You've got people who care about you now, people who will protect you." Tears welled up in Grace's eyes, though she quickly wiped them away. She had spent so long pushing people away, thinking that she had to face the world alone. But William had shown her something she hadn't realized she needed: trust, hope, and the possibility of a future beyond her past. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice breaking. William smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "You don't need to thank me, Grace. You've already done more for me than I could ever repay." They stood there for a moment, both of them processing what had just happened. The past was behind them, but the future was still uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, Grace felt a sense of peace. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't defined by her past. And maybe, just maybe, she could begin to heal. The end